My name is Eloin Damask, and I am 73 years old. I have spent the better part of my life believing that what we cannot see does not exist. I was an engineer. I built bridges. I trusted steel, calculation, and the cold honesty of numbers. I trusted nothing that could not be measured with a tool I could hold in my hands. I am writing this from a wooden chair beside a window that overlooks a field of dried lavender in a small town called Vrenthus in the hill country of central Portugal. It is early morning. The fog is still draped across the valley like a long grey curtain that someone forgot to pull back. My coffee has gone cold. I have not touched it because I cannot stop writing. I have not been able to stop since I came back. Since I came back from the other side. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. I would have laughed at a man like me 6 months ago. I would have nodded politely and looked for the nearest exit. But I am not asking you to believe me without reason. I am asking you to stay with me until the end of this account, because what I was shown, what I was told, is not about me. It never was about me. It is about you. It is about what is coming. It happened on the 14th of September last year. I had been experiencing what my cardiologist, a quiet and precise woman named Dr. Firuza Belindis, called irregular episodes. She had used that phrase so many times that I had stopped hearing it. Irregular episodes. It sounded like a television series with poor ratings. It did not sound like a death sentence. It was. That morning I woke before sunrise with a pressure in my chest that I can only describe as a closed fist. Not punching, but squeezing. The way you squeeze something you are afraid of losing. I sat up. I tried to breathe. My wife, Thessaly, was still asleep beside me, her grey hair loose across the pillow, her breath slow and even, and completely unaware that the man next to her was already beginning to disappear. I remember reaching out and touching her shoulder. I remember the texture of her cotton nightgown under my fingers. I remember thinking, I should wake her. But I did not want to frighten her. I never wanted to frighten her. That was my mistake, and it was not the first time stubbornness nearly finished me. I stood. I walked toward the bathroom. And then the fist in my chest tightened, and the floor came up to meet me with extraordinary speed. And then there was nothing. 13 minutes of nothing. That is what the paramedics told Thessaly. 13 minutes from the moment my heart stopped to the moment it started again. She had found me on the bathroom floor. She had called the emergency line with hands she described later as shaking so badly she could barely press the numbers. She had performed chest compressions until the ambulance arrived. This 68-year-old woman who had never taken a first aid course in her life, but had watched a video about it once, years before, because she was married to a man with an irregular heart, and she was the kind of woman who prepares for the things she prays will never happen. She saved my life. Let me say that clearly, so it does not get lost in everything else. Thessaly saved my life. But during those 13 minutes, those minutes when my heart was not beating, when my brain was receiving no blood, when by every clinical measure I was a dead man on a cold tile floor, I was somewhere else entirely. I do not know how to describe the place I went, because it was not a place in the way we understand places. There were no walls, there were no doors, there was no ground beneath my feet, and yet I was not falling. The light was not like sunlight. It was more like the light inside a thought, warm without a source, present without direction. I felt no pain. I want to emphasize that because pain had become such a constant companion in my final years that its absence was itself a kind of shock. My knees did not ache. My lower back, which had been a reliable source of suffering since a construction accident in 2009, was simply gone. Not healed, but absent, as if it had never existed at all. I stood there, or existed there, or arrived there. The verbs feel wrong no matter which I choose. And I understood, without anyone telling me, that I was between. between what had been and what would come, between my body on that tile floor and whatever waited on the other side of a threshold I had not yet crossed. And then I was not alone. I will not tell you what I saw because I do not have the architecture of language to build it accurately. I will only say this. What appeared before me was not a man, was not a woman, was not anything that belongs to the taxonomy of creatures I have spent 73 years categorizing. It was presence. Immense, terrifyingly gentle, ancient in a way that made the age of the universe feel like a Tuesday afternoon. And it knew my name. Not just my given name, Elowen. It knew the name underneath that. The one that is not made of letters. The name that is your entire self, condensed into a single, inexpressible truth. I felt, in that moment, as though I had been carrying a stone for 7 decades and had finally been allowed to set it down. The presence did not speak in words. This is important. Communication there is not sequential, not syllable after syllable, not sentence following sentence. It arrived in me the way heat arrives in a room, all at once, from every direction, filling every corner simultaneously. What I understood completely and immediately. There was no confusion. There was no ambiguity. There was only clarity of a depth I had never experienced in waking life. And what I was shown, what I was given, was not a private gift. It was a warning. I need you to understand something before I continue. I am not a religious man. I did not grow up in a church. My father, Oswant Damask, was a structural engineer who believed that the closest thing to God was a well-designed arch, because a well-designed arch distributes weight so perfectly that it almost seems to defy the very force it is obeying. My mother read poetry and tended her garden, and never once, in my memory, discussed the afterlife. I came into adulthood with no map for what I experienced. I had no scripture to explain it, no tradition to absorb it, no community to validate it. I had only the experience itself, lodged inside me like a stone in a river. The water flows around it, over it, past it, but the stone does not move. What I was shown was this: we are entering a period of profound fracture. Not a war in the traditional sense, not a single catastrophe with a name and a date, but a fracturing of trust, of community, of the invisible threads that hold human beings together, in spite of everything that pulls them apart. The presence showed me, in that wordless, flooding way, that the years immediately before us, and 2026 sits at the very center of what I saw, will test something deeper than politics, deeper than economics, deeper than any single crisis or headline. It will test whether human beings still know how to reach toward each other. I saw, and I use the word saw loosely, understanding that what I experienced was not vision in any optical sense. Images of people in rooms, alone, surrounded by noise that was not conversation, light that was not warmth, connection that was not touch. I saw the shape of loneliness at a scale that made me want to close my eyes, except I had no eyes to close. I saw decision points, not dramatic, not cinematic, but small and ordinary. A moment when someone chooses to speak or stays silent. A moment when a hand extends or withdraws. A moment when a stranger is seen or looked through. The presence showed me these small moments with the same gravity that I would have expected to be reserved for earthquakes, for floods, for the fall of towers, because I understood. The small moments are the earthquakes. They are the geological shifts happening at the level of individual human choices, accumulating slowly and then, all at once, catastrophically or redemptively, depending entirely on what people choose to do in the time they have. Here is where the account becomes harder to write, because this is where it becomes most personal. The presence, and again, I am aware of how these words sound. I am aware of the gap between my experience and these impoverished syllables. communicated to me something about my own life that I had spent decades refusing to examine. I had built bridges. Literally, yes. But also I had used the literal work to avoid the figurative one. I had poured my capacity for connection into steel and concrete and load calculations, because those things could not disappoint me, could not leave, could not grow sick or complicated or distant. My bridges stayed where I built them. My son, Fenwick, had not. He had left at 22, after an argument that I had been too proud to apologize for, and we had spent 11 years exchanging Christmas cards with the emotional depth of receipts. He lived in a city I had visited once, briefly, with Thessaly, who always believed the rift would heal itself without either of us having to do the difficult work of actually healing it. The presence showed me Fenwick's face, not as a vision of judgment, not as an accusation, but as an offering, the way you hold something precious out to someone and say, "This is still here. You have not lost this yet." Yet. And I understood that the crisis I had been shown, the great fracturing, the epidemic of disconnection, was not only happening in the world out there, in the headlines and the data and the cultural diagnoses. It was happening inside my own family. It had been happening for 11 years. And I had the power to do something about it that I had simply, stubbornly, chosen not to do. The presence did not condemn me for this. That is the thing that undoes me every time I revisit that moment. There was no condemnation, only sorrow, and underneath the sorrow, something inexhaustible, the possibility of repair. I came back to the sound of Thessaly's voice. She was saying my name over and over, and each repetition was more ragged than the last. And I remember thinking, even through the fog of return, that my name had never sounded so necessary. I had not known before that moment that a name could function as a lifeline. But she was pulling me back with it, syllable by syllable, and I followed the sound of it, the way a swimmer follows light toward the surface of the water. I was in the hospital for 9 days. Dr. Firuza Balindis used the word miracle exactly once, in a tone that suggested she was uncomfortable with the word, but could not locate a better one. I was fitted with a cardiac device. I was given medications with long names and longer lists of side effects. I was told, in the careful language of medical professionals who do not want to frighten their patients, but have a professional obligation to be honest, that I had been very close. I knew. I had been not just close, I had been there. On the 3rd day in the hospital, from a bed with guardrails and a view of a parking structure, I called Fenwick. He answered on the 4th ring. There was a pause, after he said hello, that felt the length of 11 years. I did not wait for him to navigate it. I said, "I nearly died 2 days ago, and the first clear thought I had, when I knew I was going to live, was that I have never apologized to you. I am apologizing now. I was wrong. I was proud, and I was wrong, and I am sorry." Another pause, longer. Then he said, "Dad, I've been waiting for that phone call for a decade." He flew out 6 days later. He was there when I left the hospital. He held the door open for me, this 33-year-old man who had his mother's eyes and my stubborn jaw. And I walked through it into the sharp autumn air and thought, this is what the presence was trying to show me. This, exactly this. I have been asked, by the small circle of people I have shared this experience with, whether I am afraid of death now. The answer surprises me every time I give it, because the honest answer is no. What I am afraid of is something far more ordinary and far more preventable. I am afraid of the years between now and death being spent in the same unconscious way I spent so many years before, building outward, towards structures and achievements, and the kind of legacy that looks impressive in an obituary, while neglecting the interior architecture, the relationships, the conversations, the apologies given before it becomes too late to give them. The presence showed me 2026 as a pressure point, a year when the accumulated weight of human disconnection will reach a kind of critical stress, the way a bridge reaches critical stress when the load it carries exceeds what its design intended. And I know, from a lifetime of engineering, what happens when a structure reaches critical stress and nothing is done to redistribute the weight. But I also know, and this is the part that the present seemed most urgent about communicating, that structures do not fail all at once. They fail through a series of small, detectable, correctable moments. Micro-fractures that warn of larger failures. Joints that loosen before they separate. Cables that fray long before they snap. The warning signs are already present if you know how to read them. The loneliness is already measurable if you are willing to look at the data. The disconnection is already happening in houses on your street, in the silences between people who share a table but not a conversation, in the years that pass between a father and a son without a single honest word. The crisis of 2026 is not a meteor. It is not a flood. It cannot be solved by governments or predicted by economists with any useful precision. It will be navigated, if it is navigated, person by person, choice by choice, in the small, unremarkable moments when a human being decides to reach toward another human being instead of away. That is the message I was sent back to carry. Not because I am special. I want to be unambiguous about this. I am a retired bridge engineer from a hill town in Portugal who loves strong coffee and argues with his wife about the thermostat. I am not a prophet. I am not a mystic. I am a stubborn old man who died for 13 minutes and came back changed. The presence did not choose me because I was worthy of the message. I suspect it chose me because I was available, because I had been heading toward that bathroom floor for years, and there was still just enough time to do what needed to be done before I got there. I have now reconnected with Fenwick. He visits every other month. We walk in the lavender fields in the early morning, when the fog is still low, and we talk, really talk, the way I never allowed us to talk before, about fear and regret and hope, and the specific, irreplaceable texture of being alive inside a particular body in a particular time. Thessaly says, I am a different man. I think she means it as a compliment, though sometimes she misses the predictable version. Predictable is its own kind of comfort, and I took that comfort from her for 23 years without understanding what it cost her to provide it. I am working on that too. If you have read this far, I believe you did not arrive here by accident. I believe that something in you recognized something in this story. An ache, a recognition, a name of your own that you have been avoiding speaking aloud. The old man who died for 13 minutes is asking you one thing: not to believe his story, not to adopt his theology or his interpretation or his understanding of what exists beyond the threshold. You can do with all of that what you will. He is asking you to think about the bridge you have left unbuilt, the call you have not made, the word you have swallowed for years because pride is easier than honesty, or because you are waiting for the other person to go first, or because some part of you believes there will always be more time. There may not be more time. That is not a threat. It is the truest thing I know, and I know it from the only place the truth of that particular weight can come from. I have been to the edge, and I have looked over, and I have been given the extraordinary, undeserved gift of walking back. Do not wait for your 13 minutes. Make the call today. Say the word today. Build the bridge today, not with steel and calculation, but with the raw and terrifying material of your own honesty, extended toward another person who is just as frightened and just as hungry for connection as you are. That is the message. That was always the message. If this account stayed with you, if something in these words touched something in your own story, please consider subscribing to this channel. I will continue to share what I have learned, not from any position of authority, but from the simple and grateful position of a man who came back and is trying every remaining day to be worth the return. The subscribe button costs you nothing. The conversation it begins may cost you everything, in the best possible way.